This is the Ag Queen Podcast. Hello, everyone. I'm Lori Boyer, your host for the Ag Queen Podcast. During this podcast, we explore the agriculture industry with the movers and shakers of those shaping it. Today, I check in with the Beef Improvement Federation. It was founded in 1968. It's an organization advancing and coordinating all segments of the beef industry. And in today, to talk more about the Beef Improvement Federation, is Executive Director Dr. Bob Weber.
Glad to be here, Lori, and look forward to our conversation.
Before I get into talking about BIF specifically, tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Sure. So I'm actually a Colorado native. Grew up down southwest of Pueblo. My folks still ranch down there near Beulah, and undergrad and master's work at Colorado State. So close connections to lots of the folks in your world, and know a number of folks around the Fort Morgan area. And in fact, Morgan County used to have a very competitive 4-H livestock judging team that we went toe-to-toe with in Pueblo County for a long time, and so really glad to connect with folks back in Colorado. Worked at the American Gelbvieh Association for a while in the late 90s, back to graduate school, and worked for Simmental, and then faculty appointments at the University of Missouri, and now here at K-State. In fact, here in about 2.5 weeks, it'll mark 10 years that my wife and I have been in Kansas and Manhattan area, and work as formerly a professor, I guess still a professor at K-State, but recently took on some new duties as a department head position. So,
when I originally asked you to share with me a little bit more information on what the connection was between Kansas State University and BIF, you said there's a pretty strong extension connection. Can you just briefly explain that piece of it, and then we'll talk about the Federation?
Yep. Yeah. So we'll talk a little bit about kind of historically the role with extension and BIF and academic researchers and breed associations has been a very strong one. And for as long as I've been engaged with BIF, which is since the late 90s, the exec has been a faculty member at a land-grant university somewhere. We kind of rotate about every 5 years or so. Somebody new will step forward and take over the reins. And so I started in 2020. Dr. Jane Parrish at Mississippi State had been the exec previous to that. Twig Marston here at K-State prior to that. And so it's a service role that we provide through the university. And so that makes a nice connection to stay in touch with producers and breed associations in the animal breeding and genetics realm, and provide a leadership role to industry.
So that leads right into the next question of telling us more about the Beef Improvement Federation. What do you guys do? And tell me more about the organization itself.
Yep. Sure. So BIF has actually been around for a long time. Started in the late 1960s with a mission of standardizing beef improvement and beef performance programs. And so one of the sort of hallmark or keystone functions of BIF is publishing the BIF guidelines for uniform beef improvement. And so many of your listeners may be familiar with, say, adjusted 205-day weights or adjusted yearling weights, some of those kind of measures. BIF was kind of the pioneering organization that helped standardize those adjustments and procedures across the industry. And so breed associations are one of the primary consumers of that material, but certainly a number of beef cattle improvement associations are as well. BIF is a federation, so we're an organization of organizations. Our members total about 70, so all the major U.S. and Canadian beef breed associations are members of BIF, as well as a number of state and provincial beef cattle improvement associations. So aggregations of performance-minded seed stock and commercial producers are members of those organizations. And so by default, that's one of our main audiences is that group. We also have engagement with a number of course, researchers in the animal breeding and genetics space focused on beef cattle across the U.S. and Canada, as well as Australia and New Zealand, some other international destinations as well. And then, of course, strong connections with USDA researchers, primarily at the U.S. Meat Animal Research Center, but a number of other locations as well that are involved in genetics research for beef cattle. So kind of spans a lot of the industry, but really I kind of use the term kind of the who's who in beef cattle genetic improvement are members of BIF.
Does what you collect as far as that information change from year to year, and how do you determine that?
So we've actually got a guidelines committee that's actively engaged in keeping that document fresh, if you will. In fact, we used to kind of have a 5 to 7 year review cycle and editorial cycle on the guidelines. Here 2-3 years ago, Dr. Bruce Golden helped motivate us along. Bruce was a former breeding and genetics faculty member at Colorado State, and then moved to industry for a while, and then back kind of in academia, and has been engaged in some software development exercises that a lot of breed associations use. But Bruce is a real techie kind of guy, and he motivated us to actually move the guidelines to a wiki format. So listeners will be familiar with Wikipedia. Actually, the BIF guidelines are built on a very similar software backbone as Wikipedia is now. And so it's a living, breathing document, and people can go in real time and make suggested edits to that document. It goes through a review cycle. We've got a committee that continually looks at that document and makes modifications to it. But it's a lot more engaging than it used to be and part of that motivation was really, one, modernize the document. And so a big effort in terms of updating and reviewing content, but also making it more responsive to change. We know, in the last few years, for instance, a lot of work on feed intake and feed efficiency measures, feet and legs, a number of other kind of cow-related topics. And then, we're starting to look forward at, the next evolution of performance measures in beef cattle around adaptability traits. So PAP scores, or pulmonary arterial pressure. I can't hardly even say it, but PAP scores is an area we've started to work in and have a number of presenters usually at our conference talk about that. And then some sustainability measures. There's a number of producers starting to collect methane, greenhouse gas emission data on cows and feedlot animals. And so starting to think through how do we standardize those performance metrics to move them into genetic evaluation systems.
Do you work across all types of breeds, cattle breeds?
Yep. So the membership includes, Angus, Hereford, Simmental, Gelbvieh, Limousin, Charolais, Red Angus, Solaire, Tarentaise. It's the across all breed groups. And so what we do is, we've got a board of directors that consists of not only producers that are representatives of the various regions and the beef cattle improvement organizations in those regions, but also a set of breed association, typically technical staff that are members of the board, and they help convey that information back to end users. They're guidelines, they're not the law, but they are guidelines that many breed associations rely on to help construct and design their genetic evaluation systems.
And Dr. Weber, does the BIF work in policy at all, legislation, things like that?
Not directly. So one of the spaces that a lot of our members work in is in policy, but we try and build the kind of the educational background and scientifically driven guidelines and recommendations for genetic evaluation. And on occasion, those things kind of bleed over into some policy areas. So one of the topical areas, in fact, at our recent BIF symposium in Des Moines, one of our speakers, Dr. Allison Van Eenennaam at UC Davis, talked about sort of the policy architecture around genetically modified livestock, the new technology of gene editing procedures. And so that kind of helps inform our audiences and the people that are then subsequently through their own organizations engaged in policy formation to have a strong background in kind of the scientific perspective around those topics.
So that kind of brings it back to full circle from when I first asked you about extension, now connecting the dots. That's where it all gets brought together, is all the research and the work being done in extension across the country kind of all pours into this, right?
Right. So there's, if you go, at our symposium, and certainly the guidelines committees, really all the thought leaders from both the producer side and the academic and government sides working together to build those recommended guidelines and standardized processes for genetic evaluation. So it really is a kind of a focus point for the industry, and certainly for folks that have, in fact, a BIF meeting a number of years ago was in Fort Collins, and so our Loveland area, and there's a real keen interaction that happens. There's a saying in BIF that the conference and the proceedings meeting, general sessions and so forth is a lot of content, but where a lot of the real action happens is the hallway talk or the bar in the evening, where people get together and kick around ideas and kind of the typical producer engagement, right? But it's a really valuable part of what we do in helping form those ideas and sort of help flesh them out. So.
Do you have to be a member of BIF in order to get data and information?
Do not. In fact,
you don't? Okay.
We've got two publicly facing, three really websites. So we've got beefimprovement.org is our main organizational website. It has a fair bit of educational material on that. If you go to bifsymposium.com, that's our conference website. Just recently refreshed, actually, with all the recordings from our symposium held in the end of June in Des Moines. And so there's a whole bunch of producer content there around our symposium. And then BIF Guidelines is connected to that, the separate Wikipedia sort of document, and all those are publicly available and open to broad consumption, both here domestically and internationally.
All right, Dr. Weber, certainly a pleasure to talk to you, to get to know you a little bit more on the Beef Improvement Federation, and I will be calling you to do this again.
Sounds great. Look forward to it. Thanks, Lori. Have a great day.
Once again, my guest, Dr. Bob Weber. He is the Executive Director of the Beef Improvement Federation based in Manhattan, Kansas. Thank you for tuning in to this edition of the iQueen podcast. Until we meet again, I'm your host, Lori Boyer.